we started off, you used to sit on a sustainability advisory panel and they used to advise us on a digital shop that we once had, and we've moved away from that now. We use gamification with points and rewarding people via vouchers, but we used to have this shop with over 1,000 different sustainability products. Absolute nightmare to administrate, but you would help us select those products. And and more recently, of course, you help us a lot. You sit on our the board of trustees for the Employee Ownership Trust, which is the majority shareholder of our business, and we're always grateful that you're a fantastic independent voice helping support our staff and negotiate that really valued position as a trust overseeing our operations.
It's been a pleasure, Josh. Yeah, and you know, back in, I guess it was around 2010, 2011, that kind of time, I remember Graham Simmons, the
Our chair.
founder and now chair, of what was Green Rewards, as you say, really being quite pioneering. You know, thinking about the use of loyalty points, which had, I guess, were quite a big thing in the noughties. You know, with Tesco Club Card and so
Boots.
forth,
Yes.
and the idea of awarding green points for engaging in, you know, more sustainable purchasing was really innovative. And so myself and a fun group of others got together to advise on what to accept into the shop and what kind of reward to provide, all part of that kind of nudge thinking that was quite prevalent, I guess, back then.
Yeah, that nudging, it's super hot topic, and it still is. It's still a core part of what we do and how our platforms work and how we get so much impact from our users, and it's fantastic to see. So I've given a bit of an introduction about how you and your role is interfaced with us and our company for since 2011. Maybe if you could just introduce yourself and explain what you're up to at the moment, Matt, and what Iken Associates do.
Yeah, of course. So been in sustainability my whole career, since just the end of the last century, so Iken Associates, which was actually founded in 2001, so it's quite long in the tooth now. I joined in 2009. Originally, it was really much more focused on the environmental compliance space, but grew into advising companies and some pretty considerable companies on sustainability strategy. So that's been a big focus for most of Iken's existence. And I guess in recent times, it's not quite gone full circle, but we found ourselves really focusing in on areas around climate-related risk, nature-related risk, topics that companies are particularly focused on, protecting value for their shareholders, by observing best practice around climate and nature and wider sustainability, but also ensuring that they're compliant with, forthcoming regulations that could bite over coming years.
No, fantastic. That's really interesting. And I suppose before we get stuck into the trends, which I know we're excited to do and we want to speak about, why did sustainability, because you would have started your career in sustainability fairly early on in its, really in its infancy. It must have changed considerably since those early days. What was it that attracted you to that sort of position and role in the first place?
I guess for me, like I suppose a lot of young people today, I just was very passionate about nature and the environment around me. I was brought up traipsing around UK national parks with my parents, and just got a passion for landscapes, wild places, and I guess as I went through my education, starting to understand more about how people and nature were not interacting in a particularly positive way, drove me to study geography, environmental sciences, particularly focused around urban populations and the way that people interact with nature in urban areas. That was a strong interest for me, and I guess that took me towards an interest in urban design and the built environment. So my second job, I worked at the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors in a Millennium Foundation set up specifically to research built environment sustainability, and I really kind of just carried on from there, and moved, I suppose, a little bit more towards policy, working on in a think tank around the time of the formation of the UK Climate Change Act. So spent quite a lot of time in those circles thinking about how the UK could legislate to deliver net zero, but also sort of the mechanic for how to do that. And actually a really strong interest, going full circle, in the role of individuals, citizens and organisations, which I guess is probably one of the reasons that we bumped into each other back then.
That's interesting. That's great. No, it's good to hear. It's good to hear. It's funny, isn't it? We speak to lots of the young people. We have lots of students using our schemes at the moment. Working with lots of universities, and we're always hearing that sort of message around why people are interested in sustainability. And so it's interesting that the reasons why perhaps you got into it 10 years ago, 15 years ago is the same as what we're hearing now from young people about their passions, and that you describe it as that conflict between the urban built environment and natural environment. And I think it rings true today as it did back then. So let's look at 2025 and what's been happening. And I don't know whether it's worth breaking down the year into a couple of chunks. I mean, there's some big ticket events that happens, whether it's the COP more recently, or I've been reading quite a lot about this climate emergency briefing, and which I thought was really super interesting, and that could be a really interesting way to cut through some noise around communicating climate change and the climate crisis to people across the country. What if you were to have what was your one biggest takeaway perhaps for 2025, or one biggest standout event for you?
Well, yeah. Well, the trouble is there's quite a lot to say about 2025, but to rise to your challenge of the one thing, I mean,
Yes,
maybe
it's a challenge. Sorry.
well, maybe you mentioned COP,
Mm.
COP 30 in Belém, and this is something that the COPs have historically garnered a lot of interest and have been pretty critical moments. I mean, certainly thinking back to, in my teens, Rio 92 was a really seminal moment in Brazil, and 30 years on, well, or so, we've gone back there. In between, Kyoto was obviously pretty critical, and then Paris, and these have been the standout COPs. I think there was an expectation that Belém would be similar, and I think a degree of disappointment in terms of the reporting coming out of it, in terms of the ability of of countries to strike multilateral agreements to tackle climate change. Clearly feels on the back foot. But I think one of the things that I've observed in my career is how cyclical events are, and the mantra coming out of Rio 92 was think global, act local, and a lot of people will still refer back to that. But in a way, I think we've come full circle to that kind of place where, as we worry about the ability of governments to strike international agreements, notwithstanding that there is continued progress in that area, actually there's an opportunity for communities, organizations, citizens to really focus in on their sphere of influence and control. And I think that really plays into the jump story really well, actually, and is one of the reasons why I continue to be involved and really enthusiastic about it, because it is fundamentally about empowering and enabling individuals to play a role in basically being the future that they want to see. And I think that is probably going to be quite important, and I do feel that is to some extent the consequence of COP 30. And the other piece of it is, I think, around this kind of pivot towards thinking about adaptation and resilience, climate resilience, almost more so than abating the emissions that we continue to cause. I mean, that's troubling on the one hand because
Well,
clearly
yeah.
we need to decarbonize.
Mm,
On the other hand, it quite fits into that local narrative because communities affected by climate change are mobilizing quite quickly, harnessing, for instance, nature, you know, thinking about urban design, etc., in a way that will make their communities more resilient. That doesn't mean we shouldn't put the brakes on climate change, but it does mean that the sort of systems and societies that we need to see are starting to emerge, and ultimately it's about critical mass. So I think we can sort of take the politics to some extent out of this and put that to one side, because it's all very uncertain in the world in terms of its kind of political future right now.
yeah,
But
yes, yeah.
people and communities still have the ability to take action and
Mm.
um and model the kind of future that they want to see in a positive way.
Yeah, and what sort of action are you talking about there, Matt? Is there, have you got a couple of examples that you could give us about where you see that happening? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is around community scale activity. I mean, I've always been impressed by, for instance, urban horticulture projects that you see popping up in cities around the world, focusing on the food system, connecting issues like environment and health together. So seeing different local economies and potentially starting to emerge, is really encouraging. I mean, it's always against the backdrop of a lot of complexity. We've got cost of living challenges. We've got lots of social issues weighing against people taking action. But something like sustainable food systems, speaks to cost of living challenge just as much as it speaks to a sustainability challenge, because if we can produce food locally, um, it obviously drives down the environmental impact, and but it also drives down the cost of fresh produce, and so it's in areas like that where I think there are real opportunities. And also in the urban context, we've seen a strong drive, particularly in some Asian markets, more so even than European ones, towards electric vehicles,
mm,
and real focus on clean transportation, and that, I think, is another trend. When I first cycled to work in London, in the 90s, you were kind of the only
yeah,
bicycle
I can
in
imagine.
sight, and
Yeah,
now you can't really realistically move
it's
on a
the other way
bike.
around, isn't it? Yeah,
So,
there's
so
far
these
more.
trends are quite clear when you take a longer view, and I think quite encouraging.
Mm, mm. I think cycling's one of those great examples where, yes, there's been an absolute explosion and the infrastructure is struggling to catch up, and things like, I think 2012 and the Olympics were a real changing point for cycling, people's attitudes to cycling in London. But if you survey 100 people who are cycling past Clapham High Street on a Monday morning, the reasons why they're doing it isn't for the climate, isn't for reduced emissions. It's all around health, fitness, get easier to get to work, feeling more refreshed, getting to work on a bicycle than sitting on the Northern Line for 45 minutes. And so it's a real, I think that to me is always a perfect example of the
Mm.
sort of behaviours that people are doing, which are fantastic for the environment and really powerful, but they're doing it for their own selfish reasons, and they're fantastic, beautiful, selfish reasons. But it's just having such a kind of a synergy and co-benefits around that sort of behaviour. And I think that's always a perfect behaviour. That if we can position other hard to reach and hard to tackle sustainability behaviours and put them in the same frame, in the same lens, then you know,
Mm.
I think like we all know that having a meat-free diet is incredibly good, and one of the biggest behaviours we can do as individuals to help combat the climate crisis and have a low carbon diet. And if we were able to position that so that people are doing it not for carbon reasons, but because of other reasons. I mean, that might be forced. We might be forced to do that by society because of the cost of meat production, or concerns around antibiotics pumped into meat, or whatever it might be, and actually people are doing it for health reasons rather than carbon reasons, then that could be really, really, really powerful.
Agreed. I think choices, behaviors are much more complex than a single driver. So as you say, both in those examples of diet and active travel, they're both clearly health and environment and economic related factors that are at play, and that just makes those solutions so much more attractive. It makes me think a little bit. I mean, it's not so much a 2025 theme. It's probably been running somewhat longer, but the notion of green prescribing within the health service is another really good example. Much more about the prevention. Is cheaper than cure. It's better for people. It's better to not get ill. It's better for the economy because you're busy, active in the workplace or in study, rather than lying in a hospital bed or at home unwell. It's way cheaper from a pharmaceutical prescribing point of view. And it brings people into contact with nature, if they're prescribed walks in the park or whatever, and that's good from a social environmental point of view. So that there are, and I think there is probably a recognition increasingly in policy making that there are better ways of tackling problems that are cheaper and better for people in the environment. Another one would be flood defense. Application of nature-based solutions to deliver natural flood management, way cheaper than building lots of concrete defences in towns and cities to rush the river through the centre of the town, which has detrimental impact on wildlife, doesn't make for a particularly attractive place. But protecting uplands, restoring habitats, bringing beavers back. That's probably a good news story for 25. There's been several beaver reintroductions. Creating, they're ecosystem engineers. They're creating habitats for multiple species to benefit from them, creating amazing wild places, encourage ecotourism. One of my roles is as trustee at Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, and the Isle of Wight is incredible now, with so much rewilding being funded through nutrient neutrality schemes in the Solent, leading to an amazing proliferation of biodiversity and bioabundance, which is then in turn attracting wildlife tourism to the island, and that's an economic benefit. So there's lots of interconnected issues here, and I think it's much better to think of them in a system than in a silo.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Now, amongst your clients you've been working with in 2025, have you seen any trends from corporations and from organisations about is there been any changes in what they're more motivated about around sustainability?
Well, actually, yes, I think so. And it picks up on my previous point. Actually, we've been increasingly working on nature markets, and nature-related risk. That's been something which I've been really pleased about. Partly that's driven by the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, TNFD, which is really aimed at understanding the financial risk to organizations in relation to nature. So that connects to some of our conversations about resilience and adaptation, because there's quite a lot of physical change in the environment as a consequence of increases in global average temperatures. But equally, a lot of businesses and sections of industry rely on services from nature, clean water, groundwater, fertilization services provided by pollinators such as bees, that are well discussed as under threat. All of that contribution that nature makes to the economy is so significant, but it is not it does not feature on the balance sheet.
Yeah.
So I think organizations are increasingly focusing on that topic, and that's definitely been something that I think 2025 has been a good year for.
And we've seen the same, biodiversity as a concept being much more popular amongst clients. We've got clients who are really keen on engaging with their staff, with students, residents around biodiversity issues, and that might be for there's popular initiatives going on like hedgehog friendly campuses and
Mm,
rewilding and getting out into green space, and all these different initiatives which are going on and are very people powered. We did a project with one of the wildlife trusts where we're encouraging residents to set aside a small part of their garden as a biodiversity hotspot, a real rewilding hotspot, and we're able then to calculate how many square meters have been rewilded across a certain area. So yeah, it's certainly becoming more prevalent in people's minds, I think, and quite rightly so. There's a biodiversity crisis as the same as the climate crisis. It's two sides of the same coin, isn't there?
yeah,
Maybe
agreed.
if we look forward now, maybe if we think not about 2025, but think about 2026, if we peer into our crystal ball and think about what else could be happening, have you got any predictions, any things which you think might be of interest to people?
Yeah, it might be lazy because it might kind of be building on trends that we're seeing growing already. But
Yeah,
one of
yeah.
the areas that I think is very interesting is understanding of soils.
Mm,
So I've noticed that the Groundswell Festival is becoming increasingly popular, and also that the science and the understanding of the ability of soils to store and cycle carbon is really poorly understood relative to carbon sequestration above ground, and that combined with sort of recognition of the role of fungi and mycorrhizal fungi and others in healthy nutrient cycling for essentially more sustainable agriculture, particularly as we see, and you see it on the television, quite a lot of references to regenerative farming, um, which isn't kind of one thing. There's no sort of one standard, but it's an area of clear interest, and it does seem to cut through to the consumer. So I think soils is one. Without them, and as it happens today, in the south of England, it's hammering it down with rain to the extent that topsoil is just being washed off into rivers and streams and into the ocean, and that's quite sort of troubling. It connects to the natural flood management point. So I think soils is a thing. The other one that I think is
sorry, Matt. I just want to one thing I want to add to that is I very much see that as a bit of a kind of Jeremy Clarkson effect in some ways. I think the work that he's done with that program, Clarkson Farm, has brought a lot to the
mm,
public's attention quite starkly. He's made several comments on that program around the how many years of tillage they've got left on the farm, and it's a finite thing, and it can't just go on forever. It needs, and you're
mm,
right, it is not very well understood in science and in the general public around just expecting fertile fields to produce year after year, and actually
mm.
that's not right. It's not reasonable. But sorry, I just wanted to
No, you're absolutely
talk
right.
about the Clarkson's farm effect
Yeah.
on the public psyche around those sort of issues.
Mm. Yeah, and for those based in England, the fens are notoriously running out of harvests,
Mm,
and so
mm,
we need to rethink how we produce food, essentially, and the agricultural system is a really big thing. It connects to our point earlier about people becoming more connected with food and sustainable diets. It's all intrinsically linked. I would plug Wild Ken Hill in Norfolk, where a friend of mine runs a regenerative farm up there, which has been tremendous and has done a beaver reintroduction and all sorts. It's really rather wonderful to go and see some of these projects. The other one I was going to mention was kind of around sustainable fashion, but more to the point of the challenge, the cost of living kind of crisis that we continue to live in. really driving widespread adoption and acceptance of the second-hand market and of repair. And I mean, people like Mud Jeans have really, been in the vanguard of this for probably a decade or more. But
Mm-hmm.
it feels increasingly accepted. The number of people I run into, in my work who will excitedly talk about this piece that they found in the charity shop that they're
Yeah.
sporting is
Or,
really great, because it,
or
it wasn't like that, in my
yeah,
experience, just
yeah.
5 years ago. So that's
Yeah, I
that's
think
really
so. I
encouraging.
think it's the Vinted effect as well. Is this the
Mm,
popularization? Maybe even eBay. It's the popularization and easy to access. You know, um, yeah, easy to access apps, and sharing high quality garments, and there is a huge booming secondhand market. And I think absolutely right. I think that can only
mm,
grow.
mm,
It's something we see popular as well. We lots of our schemes will incentivize buying secondhand, buying reuse, reducing when it comes to clothing choices, and repairing, of course. And the
yeah,
iFixit scheme, or whatever it might be. There's loads of initiatives out there which we do and incentivize, and which are proving probably more and more popular every year. So I think that's absolutely right for 2026.
yeah, good.
Right, we just got uh, one minute left. I suppose one thing which we as a team we're exploring for 2026 is the year of climate action. We want to, as a company, incentivize as many people as possible to take action for the climate. What one action would you recommend? It could be one of the ones we discussed today or completely separate. What one action would you recommend, Matt, for organizations or for individuals who want to take action around the climate?
Mm. Well, I think connecting threads of our conversation, uh, sustainable diets, and that doesn't mean necessarily meat free if you're a meat eater, but it means embracing flexitarianism and
Mm,
eating with the seasons, eating less meat, eating better food and less of it, because we waste a lot.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Well, look, thanks ever so much for your time today. Appreciate you taking time out of your busy diary. Always great to speak. Always great to catch up. And Merry Christmas if we don't speak. And yeah, thanks again.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks
Merry
everyone. Thanks
Christmas.
for joining today, everyone. And speak soon. Cheers.